Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to this virtual event organized by the Office of Technology Development at BU and titled Accelerating Breakthroughs in the Life Sciences, Insights from MassNextGen Awardees. Today we're delighted to have to host the Mass Life Sciences Center and a few awardees of their Next Gen program. We appreciate all the help that Jennifer Griffin and Annie Walsh from the Mass Life Sciences Center provided in preparing for this event. I would like to also give special thanks to my colleagues at the diversity group within the Office of Technology Development. The group is doing extraordinary work, in my opinion, and in a few different dimensions. But I think it's fair to say that one of the major goals is to identify and provide resources that really are meant to promote gender equity and diversity in innovation. Those resources are meant to really empower and connect our investigators as they make strides in their journeys as innovators. Following these introductory remarks, we'll hear from Jennifer Griffin, who will provide a short overview of the Mass Life Sciences Center and their mission, as well as the Next Gen initiative. Afterwards, we'll proceed with a panel discussion, and we're super excited to have Liang, who will be moderating the panel. The panel will feature Mimi Wen, Virginia Berger, and Elizabeth O'Day, and we look forward to hearing about their journeys from the research bench to C-level executive roles. And we'll wrap up the event with questions from the audience. Please share with us any questions that you have for the panelists using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We'll aim to address as many questions as possible, but if for some reason we can get to your question, we'll seek to follow up after the event. I would like to take a minute to introduce Jennifer Griffin. She joined the Mass Life Sciences Center in 2017 as the VP of Industry Strategy and Investments. In her role, she develops and manages the investment strategy for initiatives and partnerships with the life sciences industry, including private, public, and nonprofit stakeholders, in order to support the needs of the Commonwealth's life sciences ecosystem. Prior to joining the center, she has spent time both in academic and private sectors of the industry, most recently as senior consultant with Back Bay Life Science Advisor. Jennifer has provided a variety of strategic advisory services to private and publicly traded biotech, pharma, and medical device clients. Jennifer is a proud Massachusetts native, having received her degrees, bachelor's degrees from UMass Amherst and her PhD in biomedical sciences from UMass Medical School. Thank you, Jennifer, for being with us today. And I would like to also take a moment to introduce the moderator of the panel, Liang, who is the managing director at Boston University's Build Lab. She comes to BU with an impressive and extensive background in consulting and startup leadership. She has worked as a management consultant at Bain & Company, as an innovation strategy consultant at Innosight. Lee has held leadership positions in 2 education technology startup companies and has extensive local and international nonprofit experience. Lee holds a bachelor's in political science from Wellesley College and a master's in international relations and economics from the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. And with that, I'll turn over to Jennifer. Thanks again, Jennifer, for finding time to join us for this event today.
Thank you, Navena. Thank you to the entire team at BU for giving us the opportunity to talk about MassNextGen and how it fits into the overall innovation ecosystem here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Massachusetts Life Sciences Center, we are funded through taxpayer dollars, and we work to make sure that Massachusetts remains a global leader when it comes to life sciences. And that includes innovation, R&D, as well as commercialization of products for patients. And we do that by deploying a lot of capital in a lot of different ways, everything from supporting our STEM education in our public school systems. We invest in important pieces of R&D equipment at our universities and hospitals. We invest in the early stage incubators that you're probably very familiar with, like Lab Central, MBI, M2D2, et cetera. We invest directly into early stage companies, and this program that we're going to talk about today, MassNextGen, is one of those. We also invest in companies that are growing and scaling here in the Commonwealth. Companies like Moderna, who are now playing such a pivotal role in getting us out of this pandemic. So we do a lot of different things, but today, what we're going to focus on is one program that supports early stage entrepreneurs. And at the Mass Life Sciences Center, we feel very strongly that having a robust network of early stage companies that are being led by dynamic and capable leaders is critical to keeping our overall life science ecosystem strong in the Commonwealth. Having great early stage companies is a pivotal component that attracts larger companies to see what they're developing and supports their own R&D pipelines. And it's also a great opportunity to use your science in a more commercial setting. So what we're talking about today is predominantly how you make the decision as an academic, which the three panelists happen to be, when you are doing great research, and how do you transition into leading a company that is founded based on that great research. That's a big decision. Changing a career in any way is always a big decision. And it's a particularly important decision when you're a woman. We all know that females in this industry do face bias, and especially as entrepreneurs. Depending on the study, between 2 and upwards of 15% of venture capital dollars go to women-led companies. And so the vast majority is not going to women-led companies. And so when we learned of that many years ago, about 3.5 years ago now, we decided that there was a role for us to play in addressing this problem and identifying really qualified women leaders of early stage companies and supporting them and helping them get over that bias. And so we put together a program called MassNextGen, which you'll hear about. And this program is in its 3rd year right now. We are about to accept applications for the 4th year, starting in January, and that closes in the middle of February. And each year we support between 5 and 6 women entrepreneurs of early stage companies. We give them a non-dilutive grant, depends on the year and how much money we have to work with. Last year was around $80,000. And we also provide them with a coaching network. So we have assembled between 15 and 20 serial entrepreneurs, investors, and other types of key stakeholders within our ecosystem that work with the women and open up their own networks and provide coaching around specific topics that are relevant for early stage entrepreneurs, but also meet with them independently and make sure that they can provide connections or advice to get them through what is really a very difficult task, which is standing up a company and hiring people and getting it funded and making it successful. So we're very proud of the program, but we're mostly proud of the entrepreneurs and the work that they've done during the program, but also after the program. And so today you'll get to hear directly from them. We have one entrepreneur from each year 1, 2, and 3. And I can't wait to have you hear their stories and their perspective about being an academic turned entrepreneur and also a woman doing it. So without further ado, I will pass it over to the moderator and the panelists and ask them to join us on stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. And what a great pleasure for me to be here today, to be with 3 amazing MassNextGen Awardees, who are each founder of a life sciences startup. And so instead of me, of course, introducing the 3 of them, I thought it'd be much more fun for them to each introduce themselves to you. How about we start with Liz?
Thanks, Lee, and thanks, Jennifer, and thanks everyone for the opportunity to talk to you guys today. I'm thrilled to get a chance to share a little bit about my story, and even more excited to hopefully interact with all of you. So a little bit about me. My name is Liz O'Day. I'm the CEO and founder of Olaris. This is a company that I started 6 years ago now, directly as a spin-out from my PhD at Harvard. I was a joint student studying biophysics and cancer biology, and basically my thesis project became the technology the company is based off. We do metabolomics and machine learning to develop patient stratification tools, trying to figure out of all the drugs that are out there, which is the one that is most likely to benefit you. We primarily operate in oncology, but also expanding into different areas, including CNS and neuro as well. I also play as a role in sort of the precision medicine field. I'm the co-chair for the World Economic Forum's Biotechnology Council. I'm on the board for the Personalized Medicine Coalition. I sit on a bunch of steering committees. And as I was just chatting with Virginia, I write for Scientific American about cool technologies and where investors need to be putting their dollars and things like that. So happy to meet you all and look forward to chatting more.
Thank you, Liz. How about Mimi?
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Lee, for the introduction, and thank you to all of you for organizing this event. I'm very happy to share my experiences as well. So my name is Mimi Yen. I am the CEO and co-founder of PhagePro, and it's a very similar story to Liz. This came out of my thesis work. I was doing my PhD in microbiology in Andy Camilli's lab at Tufts University. So what we do is we look to reduce antimicrobial resistance, but particularly in global health. So this came out of my work using bacteriophages or phages as a way to prevent cholera transmission. And that's the work that we're focused on now, and primarily going to stick in the global health sector as well. So I have a little bit of a winding story, I suppose, to where I am now, right after the PhD. During the last year or so, I was doing this 100K program or competition that Tufts offers to all of its students. And that's how we decided to start a company. It wasn't really something that we thought about doing. At the time, I had already applied to part-time MPH programs as well. So I actually started the company and did a master's in public health at BU at the same time to learn more about global health and program management, which sounds like a strange thing to do as a business startup entrepreneur, but it's actually really been helpful since that is the work that we do, and it gives a lot more perspective for that. DEI is something that I've always been passionate about, diversity in all its forms. So in addition to what I do at work, I also serve as the One Young World US Ambassador, working with healthcare workers around the world to elevate their voices and share their practices. And recently, with two friends here in Boston, we just started a group called Scientists in Solidarity, focused on creating a safe community for Black, Indigenous, people of color, or BIPOC in the life sciences. So really focused on providing a support group for women of color in particular. But I'm very excited to connect with all of you. And if you don't get a chance to ask your question, I'm very happy to answer it offline as well.
Thank you, Mimi, and thank you for the rich information. And Virginia.
Hi, I'm Virginia. I'm also very happy to be here, and I'm from the newest class of MassNextGen Fellows, so I'm really excited to be hearing the perspectives of the people from earlier classes on the panel. So this is a very exciting thing for me too, and I'm happy to share my story of how I got here. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of New Equilibrium Biosciences, which is pursuing drug discovery for a class of currently undrugged and very relevant proteins involved in cancers and neurodegenerative disorders. And this has come out of my PhD and postdoc work that was focused on intrinsically disordered proteins and trying to think, well, what could we do differently to actually design drugs for these challenging proteins? And so we're a computational experimental company, and we started in August 2019. So it's just over a year now, and it's really exciting. And I want to answer all these questions. And I was a PhD student in Pittsburgh first at University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon, and then I went to MIT for my postdoc, which is where I really got into startups. And I don't know if this would have happened if I hadn't been there.
Thank you, Virginia, and thank you, all of you. I'm already inspired. Thank you for your stories. We'll go a lot deeper as we talk about each question. So the first question I want to start with, and I think Mimi, actually you addressed part of this already, but what I really want to ask you is, how did you actually decide, right, to go from thinking about you have an idea and being an academic to actually, I'm going to take action and go found a company? Like, how did you decide to do that?
Yeah,
Why don't we have Mimi, you could start. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really scary thing to do at first. I didn't have any business experience. I didn't even know who to ask to start everything off. So my story started with the Tufts 100K competition. Our PhD work was downtown campus, and this was something that the main campus in Medford was doing. And the more I asked about that competition, the more excited I got. We went through business plan writing, pitch deck, all of that, which I've never done before. And then ultimately we won second place, which was very surprising. And I was like, oh, now I have to do something with this. So it's more of, there was a support ecosystem at my school that was more entrepreneurially minded. There was mentors there to begin with from the business school that really said, I think you have an idea here that is worth translating, because no one in my PhD work was able to do that jump for us. So it's really figuring out who in my ecosystem thought that this was an idea worth pursuing, and if it is worth pursuing, how are you going to get there? So I think being able to identify that network and those resources to first tell you whether or not you have something that is worth exploring in a commercial way is important.
So I also came to this through school. I was a postdoc and I was working on faculty applications and going to seminars like this, but listening to people who were already professors talk about their experience. And I just wasn't getting excited, even though it was what I'd always wanted to do. And then a friend of mine asked me to go to a seminar with her in the business school about people who'd been doing startups. And I just loved like the enthusiasm and the energy in the room. And I said, I think I want to look into what that is. And so I started taking courses. It was luckily still January. So I signed up for different courses in the business school and through the venture mentoring service, and ended up just really loving it and started working on the business plan then. And then when I was thinking about like, well, what next? Because my postdoc was ending, I wanted to get experience in industry first before actually starting a company, because it was just so different than what I'd always seen before. And so I said I was actually going to go and work for 2 years, and I joined a startup. And I spent 2 years at the startup just doing a lot of business development and understanding what it is to market products to pharmaceutical companies and what has to happen in a team to get things done. And so I just spent 2 years just really learning. And then I had given myself a deadline of only being there for 2 years, because you can get kind of cozy in a job. It's nice. And so then 2 years was running up, and I spent the second half of the second year every single weekend looking for a co-founder and working on the business plan, and then leaving. But it was definitely like good to have this extra experience, but I don't know if it's necessary, but it was good.
Awesome, super cool. I'm curious to see how you think like startup world, starting your own company is versus working at a different startup down the line, but we can pick your brain later. So my decision to start a company is, I think, a little bit different. In fact, I had zero intention of ever starting a company. Had you talked to me, 6 months before me passing in my PhD thesis and, even hinted that I would start a company, let alone be a CEO, I think I would have told you were, absolutely bananas. And that's because I think I was this perfect combination of incredibly naive and probably a little bit arrogant too. So my whole life, I've been wanting to cure cancer. My brother had cancer when we were kids. He's fine, but it has been like my mission in life to cure cancer. So I've been working in a lab since I was like 16 years old. It's the only job I ever had. And I thought that that's actually how you cure cancer. It was like, being in the lab and doing that. And it was truthfully only when I turned in my thesis that I realized kind of the disconnect between what I was doing, which was obviously still very cool and important work, but versus like what I thought I was doing, and even further, like what I wanted to be doing. And, I wanted to be helping to get innovations to patients, to people like my brother, to others. And so I was like, quite honestly, a little bit of a lost puppy at the end of my PhD, not knowing what I wanted to do next. And thankfully, networking is something that I heard Mimi say. I think, your network and your resources are great things for all of us to take advantage. I had previously started a fashion company called Lizard Fashion. We made science fashionable, and I had taken a bunch of classes at the business school and became friends with some of the Harvard HBS professors. And when I was this lost little cherub, my PhD advisors were like, "What the heck is wrong with you? You're an American female biophysicist. You're staying in academia." So they didn't quite understand, that I was like maybe not satisfied. But there was a business school professor, Bill Solomon, who deserves a lot of credit for why I am what I'm doing right now. He told me to like calm down and said, like, if you could do one thing in the world, like, what would you do? And I like rattled off, Olaris's technology, or at that time my thesis technology, and said I would start a company that like actually cures cancer. And so he challenged me to do it. I told him he was batshit crazy. But over about a process of like 6 months, meeting other people and kind of like refining the idea, I actually decided to give it a go. And here we are 6 years later.
Thank you all for sharing. There's that piece, I feel like, of how you found your way to entrepreneurship, but then along the way, there's these people that you got exposed to or you search out for that gradually bring that to life. I want to go a little deeper on kind of how you learn to start a company, because you obviously all came from a PhD academic background. And I know Virginia talked about you actually intentionally worked in industry, right, to learn some more of this. And then, and Mimi, you went to the business school, and I think Virginia, you did, right, to take on some of the resources. But overall, what steps did you take, right, to learn about how to start a company and how to be a founder? I guess, Virginia, would you like to go first?
Yeah. So some of the steps were taking these courses in the business school that really helped. And I also did a hackathon. And in both of those cases, we had to build a company that did something as a group, and actually within either a weekend for the hackathon or a semester for the business school course, like promote the company and make a business plan. And so that taught like a lot about the, like what it actually goes to having a business plan and getting somebody to invest in your company. But the actual like day-to-day of running the company, like I kind of do it just like I did my PhD and postdoc, that you just kind of have things on your to-do list and you get them done. But one thing that I found very surprising is that so I started on August 2nd, 2019, and every week has been like planned out, because there's like, you say you're doing a startup and you're in Boston, and pharmaceutical companies will just for some reason get in touch, and then you're like, oh shoot, I have this meeting coming in a month and I need to prepare. And it's just kind of like, I find it surprising how like I have like a big vision of what I'm supposed to be doing in time, but there's never like a time when you're just kind of like, oh, but there's nothing to do, like it's my company, nobody's giving me a task. Like it's kind of, Boston's just a good place to have a company, because there's constantly things going on. Like I had to apply for MassNextGen, and then you have to apply for an NSF grant, and there's just always something on the to-do list. So that's just kind of come naturally. But then luckily, like through these things that Massachusetts and the US government tell you to apply to, mentorship comes out of that. And then there's more learning. So it's kind of less, like the actual starting the company is less scary than I thought it would be. Getting funding though is scary. So.
Yeah, maybe I'll jump on after to build on some of the things Virginia said. Like starting a company is actually pretty easy. You like go to the Secretary of State website, fill out a form, and boom, you've got like a company, right? So the actual like logistics of it, but the like entire process and building out everything in between, and even like knowing what to do, it can be a little intimidated. I was certainly intimidated by it. So similar to what maybe picking up what Virginia said, I tried to approach it very similar to like how I approached any scientific problem, and like, how do I become like an expert in this? How do I learn the language? How do I learn all the like the acronyms? So I had the crash course in lizard fashion and had taken a bunch of classes at HBS. So I think, that is something I encourage people to do. Even like I just sat in and like learned some of the lingo. But then because I was a grad student and had no money, I also took like a full MBA on Coursera meaning like I just listened to the classes, right? To try to understand, just what's a cap table and things like that. And then I changed also like my reading. Biotech is a different world than like sciences. So like I was used to reading like Cell Nature, science papers, the Holy Trinity, like every week. And that shifted to reading all the biotech news rags, just understand how people viewed and talked about things. And then as Virginia said, like all of that kind of got distilled down into like a never ending to-do list, which again, 6 years in is continuing to grow with stuff to work on.
Yeah, I would add on to that in that I didn't have any business expertise going in. And it really is just how do I find some sort of footing in this world so I could start to understand what's being said around me. Someone said BC to me and I was like, I have no idea what that means. I have to go look it up now. But going off of what Liz says, there's a lot of resources that are accessible and free online. And that's where I started. Not only Coursera, but also edX as well. And then there's a bunch of seminars around that are being held. So the Capital Network has some, and you can usually find a way to get an affordable price for each seminar as well. And you can always look at your local school and their business school to see what kind of seminars they're having if you don't have time to audit a class. And then from there, it's identifying who do you want to talk to. So I talk to a whole bunch of people. I feel like I'm still constantly learning how to be a CEO. At the beginning, I didn't even call myself a CEO. I was like, I'm the science person. I'm the scientific co-founder. And it took me 2 years to realize that what I've been doing this whole time was the job of a CEO, and I should be comfortable holding that title and stepping into what I've been doing all along. So being able to learn from other people that you identify have the same leadership style, have the same philosophy, and having conversations with them is really helpful at the beginning. And then the last thing I would add is that finding people who are in the same position as you are or just a little bit ahead. So that's why MassNextGen is so great, because we have the cohort that is in the same stage as we are. There's the cohort ahead that's a little bit further ahead. And then we could pass it on to the people who are just coming into the MassNextGen. So I find that sometimes you can find all these people who are experts in CMC or experts in like chemistry, manufacturing, control, or experts in business development, but you don't have anyone who has lived this full experience of, oh my gosh, I need to find a team, or I have to find, how do I hire? I'm worried about this thing, I'm worried about that thing. How do I do all of this? How do I prioritize everything that I need to do to start a company? And I think finding someone who's in a similar stage to be able to talk back and forth about that process and all the feelings involved in that process is very helpful as well.
Before we move on, I actually think that's a really important point of like talking to people. And when I think back, that was probably, one of the most important things I did. So prior to starting Olaris, I never drank coffee, and now I always drink coffee, but it started with going on coffee dates from anyone, who had started a company that I could just like be a sponge and learn from them about their best practices or their experience. And, and taking the time to like just generally trying to learn from someone. I used to teach at BC, don't hold it against me, BU. And I used to teach entrepreneurship. And what I told my students was like, networking is going to be like a big part of like your success. And especially doing it like when you're not quote unquote dangerous, when you're not looking for money or you're not looking for a job. So getting out there where you're genuinely just trying to learn from someone, I think is like a big part of how you kind of get the skills needed to start a company and build a company.
Thank you so much for demystifying how to learn to be a founder, and very helpful advice. I hope that 100% of the audience here go out here, leave this event thinking that they can take these steps and actually go talk to people and find the resources. That's plenty around Boston, as you mentioned, right, and online to be an entrepreneur. Now, but back to resources, I also want to ask this, since you all came from an academic background. So during this process of starting a company, right, what role did your university play in this process? And what influence did your PI or academic advisor have on this whole process as well?
I'm happy to.
And Liz, would you like to start? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump first. So I was a joint student at Harvard, and then when my lab was affiliated with Children's Hospital as well. And so one of the big pieces when you're starting a company is like the technology, right? And potentially like licensing or getting access to, you know, a patent. And I will say quite honestly, that Harvard and Children's were very helpful until they weren't helpful. And I actually think that that's kind of natural with how it works. So tech transfer offices' jobs are to take the cool, badass technology that all of us scientists create, you know, create some intellectual property around it and then to build companies with it, but for them to then represent the university. So that at some point they're like your biggest, strongest advocates of like forming these patents and getting everything in place, but then, you know, moving it out of the university and into a company, like that's really on you to drive and make sure that you and whoever you got around your table, you know, have all the logistics work out so that you have, you know, the freedom to do this and that the terms are correct and that that's going to be able to allow you to attract investors. So I will say that the tech transfer office, you know, was super helpful in educating me and helping to sort of set up meetings and for me to understand this process of being able to sort of take what was my PhD thesis and turn it into a company.
Yeah, I would echo that the biggest thing when it comes to university support is that tech transfer office. And I think most of the universities in the Boston area have some experience spinning out companies from university IP just because of the ecosystem that we're in. But establishing a working relationship with that tech transfer office from the beginning when you're a student and you're learning everything to ultimately having to negotiate a license agreement so that you can use that IP, the relationship and the power dynamics do change with that university tech transfer office over time. So I think making sure that right at the beginning, you're upfront and you go to them and you say, I'm thinking about spinning this out. How do I go about doing this? And letting them know, as long as you're communicative and transparent, that's what they appreciate the most. And ultimately, it's like any other negotiation and collaboration, you work through everything that both sides want and ultimately come up with a compromise. And then I was also very lucky. My PI is my co-founder. He's always been very supportive. He didn't spin out a company before, so it was really on me to learn all of the business side of things, either teach it to him or go do it together, learn it together. And I think as a PI, he's been incredibly supportive. And that's always a weird shift also in the power dynamics to go from a grad student of someone to ultimately now I'm Andy's boss. So that's weird also, but you just try to work through that and recognize that it sometimes is an uncomfortable dynamic that you just have to talk through and realize where each other is coming from. And ultimately the company comes first, the science comes first, your patients come first. So focusing on something other than ourselves is really helpful in navigating that relationship as well.
I had a slightly different situation because I already had left the university 2 years before starting the company. So we haven't had any tech transfer challenges, which is really convenient and nice. But so I've really taken advantage of all of the courses through the university, and those were so helpful. And when I told my PI that I wanted to start the company, he immediately suggested courses to take, and it's just been like a real advocate, which has been nice. And it turns out like over the years, like when I think I was the second or third person from the lab, but like so many other people have now gone on to start companies too who were formerly in his lab. So there's a bit of a network coming out of that, which is neat. And I think it's just because like one person had done it, then he referred me to them. And it's just now like, oh, you go to the lab and you can do a startup. And people get scared that their PI is only going to want them to become a professor. And so I think once they've let one person do it, like they get a reputation of being nicer about it. And I think that's ending anyway. And then my PI from my PhD started a company a year before I did. And so now he's kind of like, we were saying about MassNextGen, that the people in the older cohorts you can learn from, like he's also in my group of people who is just 1 year more experience in this that I can go to for help, which is really nice. And so he stayed, he's kind of like a buddy now instead of a mentor, and I really like it. And then my co-founder is a professor at a different university, and so we deal with issues now, like with like the IP and everything with that university, and it always does get complicated, but I think it's a little easier for me because I'm not like, well, this is my technology. It's like, so it's that there was never a dynamic change. It's always just been like, okay, that they own the technology. I want the technology. How do we deal with that? But we've just dealt with that by having everything be new for the company, which makes it easier. But there's always going to be this like IP ownership is a big deal.
Yeah, very helpful. So there's that working through the steps, and then the communication, the good communication with your PI. And may I also plug university innovation centers, where it could also be helping founders or aspiring founders. When starting your company, let me shift the gear a little bit, because, even when you decided, okay, you're going to start a company, there were actually still many roles that you could potentially take on, instead of, say, actually you'll be the CEO. How did you each decide that you would actually take on the CEO role instead of taking on a different role in the company? Would Mimi, maybe you'd like to start?
Sure. So before, I think at the very beginning, I thought of myself as the chief scientific officer. And certainly sometimes when you bring work out of your PhD into a company and you still want to be part of the C-level suite, that is definitely a strong role to play. You still have influence on strategy, but you're really focused on directing R&D. Ultimately, what I realized was that I think my strongest skill set is in managing relationships with stakeholders and setting the whole vision for the company, which is what the CEO really does right at the beginning. So for me, the responsibilities that I was drawn most to ended up being the ones that fell under the CEO role rather than the CSO role. I think I'm a good scientist, but I think there are much better scientists than I am who are much smarter, who will be able to really bring the R&D forward much better than I can. And where I come in is having a scientific background, understanding the science, being able to make decisions off of that science, but ultimately being able to set the company strategy, manage the relationships to move that science ultimately to the vulnerable communities that we're trying to help, and always being able to guide us back to that mission. I think that's where my strength lies, and that's why my skill set fit the CEO better than another role in the company.
I think I kind of struggled with that a lot at first, because I felt like we should have somebody who knows business being the CEO. And so at the beginning, I was looking for a business person to join me. And there's also a lot of like outside influence that a lot of accelerators like to see a co-founder who is hands-on all the time. And so then you have to think about like, well, if I bring on a co-founder, what should they do and what should I do? And like, how do we split these roles? And so there's a lot of emphasis on finding those roles right away and also the right person. And ultimately, like I almost brought on somebody to be the business co-founder, but I just didn't feel comfortable with it, because I felt like I have this big vision for drugging these undrugged proteins and how to bring that together. And that if somebody just hadn't had just quite as much passion for this as I have, it wouldn't work out. And that I need to be the one who's really like thinking, who do we have join us? Who do we work in this role and this role? And there's so many outside pressures to do so many different things that I felt like I needed just, I was the only one like pure enough in this vision that I would be able to keep things going in the direction I wanted to go. But I think in like 5 or 6 years, if we really become more of a pharmaceutical company, then we'll bring on a CEO who knows how to run a pharmaceutical company. But for now, like when we're building up our platform, I think it makes sense to have the person who's like really, really linked to the science be the person who drives the company. And so that was how I ultimately decided.
I think that's great. I'm just kind of smiling because I think we've all probably lived some very similar experience of going through this, So when I started Olaris, we had investors from day one, which was lucky. But they didn't give me the CEO title because I think they thought I was the scientist, right? And so I do think there are these sort of pressures, especially if you come from an academic training, that you should, just immediately fill the science role. And that's fine. I mean, that, as Mimi said, a very important role in setting kind of the company direction. And I didn't argue with them. I had never started, a biotech company. I had no idea, what the CEO sort of job entailed and if one I would like it or I would be good at it. But over time, I think I checked both of those boxes, right? That I enjoyed setting the company vision. That's really like what the CEO's main responsibility is, and being the number one cheerleader, like Virginia said, right? And so I just, I couldn't imagine anybody else like steering our ship, especially in these like really, really crucial, days. And, my investors also agreed. And so, got the title of CEO. And, I think I share a similar philosophy to Virginia, as I think I am the woman for the job right now, but as we grow, I hope I'll grow into that role. But if I don't, or there's somebody else, we'll see how that is, and we'll tackle that head on. So I think like all of us, I think, are very mission driven of having our technologies sort of be successful, like independent, of what the roles that we play in it. So I think, like deciding if you want to be CEO, like requires a lot of like taking stock of self. I know a lot of scientists turn entrepreneurs that probably shouldn't be CEO because they can't talk to all the people that you have to talk to, and be comfortable talking about finance and all these other things as well. So, I think having kind of that openness of, all right, is this the job for me? Do I add value? And if not, are there other ways that I can?
And to follow on what you said, Liz, right? And so in a company, beyond the CEO, there are different expertise that you need to bring this company together, right? How did each of you in beginning, how did you build your team? How did you find your team, right? A co-founder or the initial team, or even other people along with you, maybe it's advisor or a board member to help you get this all started? Whoever want to go first in this case, maybe Virginia, would you like to start?
Sure. So finding the co-founder was really the important thing. First, mainly because I wanted to have somebody who I could talk to about everything going on in the company, because there's a lot to think about and a lot of decisions to make. And I wanted somebody who also was super, super, super passionate about IDPs. And I didn't know who to ask. And a lot of people will know somebody from grad school who has complementary skills and could do it, but I couldn't think of the right person. And so I ended up talking, I'm a computational chemist, but during my postdoc, I actually worked in a wet lab to gain that experience too. And I knew that the people from that wet lab did have the skills I needed. And so I went to visit that PI last July and said, do you know anybody from your lab who wants to do a startup? Could you introduce me? And he was like, well, nobody from the lab, but Peter Tampa, who is one of the leaders in this field, wants to do one. You should go talk to him. And it was like 4 p.m. on Friday afternoon. And he was in his office. And then he ended up staying late. And we just really hit it off. And we've been talking every single day since. And then I'd already given my notice at work thinking, okay, I'm going to spend all of August looking for a co-founder, but then I didn't have to because I'd found him, and that really worked out. And then after that, there's been a lot of questions about who else to bring onto the team, because every investor we've spoken with is like, well, we need another hands-on co-founder here, or we need at least a CTO or a CSO. What are we going to do? And so there's been a lot of discussion, and we kind of feel like when we feel internally that we need that person, we'll bring them on, and that it'll come out of the job. And we'd like to hire somebody as a senior scientist and then notice that they're super devoted and then promote them. But I don't know. But we've been hiring people for the roles as they come up. So we've hired people who help out in the lab. We have a full-time lab person. We've hired people to develop our algorithms. And that's all just really tricky, because I love every single person in the first interview. And then the second interview, I still love them. And then the third interview is finally when I'm like, maybe not. And so it's very time consuming, but I think we're getting slightly better. And it's helpful having more people in the company going to these meetings as we hire more people, because then there's more than just my perspective. But we've been just bringing on people as the need for somebody doing something appears.
Awesome. Yeah, I think growing your team is like, a critical thing from going from like idea to real company, right? And how to do it. There's probably no right answer, and different for every company. So Olaris, I was the only founder. And for the first, 3 years, I was the only employee. So like, CEO title actually probably didn't matter because I also took out the trash, did whatever else needed to be done, all those things. But that doesn't mean I was alone. Like I had, consultants, interns, made use of the Mass Life Science internship quite a lot. Kind of like part-time people that were helping me out to fill those gaps that are needed to grow the company. I mean, growing a team and getting funding are intimately connected. You really can't like do one without the other. And so, as Olaris has grown, actually it was the Mass Life Science Center that let me, when we won that cash, hire my first full-time employee. Instead of just like, we had like 6 or 7 like part-time or consultants or interns. And then I had one dedicated human that could just like take something off my plate and drive it forward. And then after he joined, we hit milestones and successes. And so then we were able to hire more and more. Right now we're up to a head count, I think, of 14. And we have 5 open positions. So anybody out there, Olaris is hiring for everything, from BD to scientist to metabolomics and things like that. But I think adding to your team is it's like adding to your family. So it is like a really like delicate thing that you have to take, really important. It's not just who has the best skills, but who has the best passion, and who's going to work well with the rest of your teammates. So it's a really important part of growing a company.
Yeah, I echo that. I think when it comes to hiring, for sure, I think for us, we thought who's a better fit for the culture of our team. And ultimately, we have a lot of applicants who come in who have similar scientific backgrounds, but it's ultimately who's going to work best with our team, because a small startup is a stressful time. So you're going to be with these people who are seeing you at a stressful time, having to do a lot of work together as a team going forward in order to accomplish all of these milestones. So I agree that the first few hires are especially critical to the success of your company. And when it comes to co-founders, I think the cliche thing that people say is that finding a co-founder is like dating, and it really is. You don't want to do it when you're desperate for someone, because you might ignore a lot of red flags that are coming up. But when we started, Andy was my co-founder and still is still on the team. We also had a postdoc. I think it's always important at the beginning to have the conversation of, okay, if we do this, what is your commitment? Because ultimately we've gone through makes it sound terrible, but our first co-founder, she decided to go back to Scotland and decided she didn't really want to be involved in a startup company anymore. The co-founder we found after that, who has a little bit more business expertise that we thought would complement well, ultimately decided that biotech wasn't where he wanted to be. So I think it's important to have a lot of these conversations right at the beginning to understand, okay, if we're going to do this, it's going to be full force forward. What are you thinking for the next year? What are you thinking for the next 3 years? If we hit this milestone, do you think you'll be able to stay on? And ultimately figuring out everyone's commitment and also how the personality, work styles, and skill sets complement each other, since you don't want everyone having the same skill set and the same perspective on the team as well. You want to have diversity, and that's what makes the team stronger. So I think being a little bit slower to hire and being a little bit slower finding your co-founder is absolutely okay.
And co-founder is like a nebulous term. Like people think you have to have it right at the beginning, but you can add co-founder. I could add a co-founder tomorrow if I want, and Olaris is 6 years old, right? So it's just I don't know. I don't find a lot of utility in that word, or things like that.
Yeah. So you've now addressed the people side of the resource question. Let's now hop into the financial side of the resources question. How did you find, especially in the beginning, the funding to get you off the ground? And if you could each share, that'd be really helpful. And why don't we start with Liz in this case?
Yeah, sure. So, so the sort of genesis of Olaris and our funding are tied together. So, I told that story of like Bill Solomon, he was the dean of entrepreneurship at HBS, who asked me what I wanted to do with my life. And he encouraged me to start a company. I told him, hell's no. And after about 6 months of him like sending me out on coffee dates with other like biotech entrepreneurs of the like Henry Tremere, and John Abley and Bob Carpenter and all these like amazing rock stars, because we live in Boston and all these people are here, I finally gained the confidence to start Olaris. And so Bill had convinced me to apply for like HBS, and that was kind of supposed to be my game plan. So there was a year between my PhD and in theory going to business school. And so I emailed Bill after about 6 months of these like coffee dates and said, like, don't be pissed at me, but like, I think I'm going to try to start, the company. And he said, great, I'd like to be your first investor, which was like a wonderful thing, right? And then similarly, like a lot of those guys that I had gone out for coffee dates with, I wrote them a nice thank you note for what they did to inspire me. And the majority of them ended up being in that first round of like angel seed investing. So like, I think it just reiterates the importance of sort of networking and getting to know people, and getting them to know you and what you're passionate about, and, and all those things are really, really crucial. So that was how we originally got started. We've had, we've raised $7.5 million to date over our 6 years. We're like I'd say like a real startup. There's lots of different levels of startups in Boston, like bootstrapped, angel invested. We closed our Series A last September, which was led by InnoSpark Ventures, that brought in institutional funding. And we're on the road to close our Series B in 2021. So fingers crossed, yeah.
Yeah, so our company is a little bit unique. We don't really go for venture capital or angel investment, since global health is not something that investors are like, yes, let me invest in that and get a huge return on that later. So we go towards non-dilutive funding, meaning we go for government grants. So I first got funding from a small business grant from the NIH. So if anyone's interested in small business grant writing or anything like that, I have lots of experience with it. But I did a phase 1 small business grant. We got a favorable score for our phase 2 that we're waiting to hear back in a month. So that's mainly where our funding is coming from, which is different than a lot of biotechs in the area, but non-dilutive funding also has an upside where it's because it's non-dilutive. Usually the founders still maintain some sort of control and say over the company as well. So I think there's downsides and upsides to it, and I'd be happy to talk about it if anyone's interested in learning about that. But I think for an academic, I know how to write grants. It was the easiest translation of my skill set from academia to business.
So we started, like I'd worked for 2 years beforehand. And then I knew I was working for 2 years. And so when I was about 6 months out of starting New Equilibrium, I said, okay, I'm saving money now. And I was like, that was kind of a change, but I mean, I'd only had like a non-postdoc salary for a year anyway. So I just like went back to living off of my postdoc salary. And that gave me about 6 months of funding for myself, which was really nice. And then I was able to like look at getting some kind of funding to actually like have more people in the company. And during that time, the Petrie accelerator started in Boston, and I joined a different accelerator, and then I heard about Petrie, and it was specific for biotech and right in Boston, and it just seemed like the right thing. And so I like left my initial accelerator, which was not just for biotech and wasn't quite the right thing, and came back to Boston. So that really worked out. And then they provided $250,000 of dilutive funding. So they do have equity in the company, but with that comes lots of mentorship and a cohort of other people in the same stage, which is really, really wonderful. And so I've been with them for about a year now. And then I guess the program's going to end at some point, but accelerators never really end because they just want you to be successful. So it's still going. And then when we got the MassNextGen grant, that was when we were also able to hire our first experimentalist, because even though like 250,000 sounds like a lot, like when you think of the cost of lab space and experiments, we needed the MassNextGen grant too to actually make that happen. And so that's been really wonderful. And then we also got an SBIR recently, which is really wonderful. And I think that also comes out of the academic experience in writing grants, that I was just like, okay, we can do this, but it's still really scary to like apply for the next one. So we're really working hard now towards our phase 2 goals, but the funding definitely like is a big part of it, because you can't bring on new employees without some kind of funding. And we've really benefited a lot already from the different interns through Mass Life Science Center, because they do so many wonderful things, and they're all curated ahead of time, which is nice. And it's just an organized spreadsheet, so it's an easy way to hire people, and they're great people. So it's been really nice.
Yeah, thank you. And so Virginia, you're already talking a little bit about how the MassNextGen program has helped you. And I know there's people in the audience queuing up for their questions, but before I hand over to the audience Q&A, I do want to ask you 2 more questions here. One is, what unique challenges did you feel that you face as a female starting a company? And what were resources that you found to be most helpful in helping you to tackle those challenges? And how did the MassNextGen program here help you in particular? Maybe Mimi, would you like to start?
Sure. So I think the first time I really noticed that there was a gender gap was when I was competing for the Tufts 100K competition. They had it in this building, and I just went to the restroom right before I had to do my pitch. And for the first time, there was a line for the men's restroom and there was no line for the women's. And the women's bathroom lights, which are automated by movement, were completely off. And this was like maybe already the afternoon of everyone coming back. And I was like, okay, so there's really not that many women in this competition to begin with. And then when I started going out to all these seminars and trying to learn as much as I could, I also noticed I was one of the few women in the room, definitely one of the few women of color in the room. And whenever people asked me about my idea, they didn't actually ask me about my idea. They asked me, being a woman of color, they asked me where I was from. They asked me a lot about the risks of my company. They didn't ever talk about the upsides of the company and the potential and the opportunity that that company could have. And I think that's an experience that reflects a lot of women entrepreneurs pitching. We're always asked about risks. We're not really asked about the opportunity. So I found it to be very isolating. And I think through programs like MassNextGen, we also did Mass Connect through Mass Bio. I was able to find a cohort of people who were incredibly supportive and could also tell me realistically, what is it like to be a woman entrepreneur in the biotech sector? What is it like to be pitching to a room of people who don't look like you and might not be even paying attention to you when you speak? And I think knowing that other people are going through it, have gone through it, how did they cope with it? And then figuring out from that energy, what can I do in my space? How can I run my company? How do I provide support to my women employees when we start to go out and speak externally? Figuring all of that out is definitely difficult, but not impossible, because there are so many strong women here in Boston. There are so many strong programs like MassNextGen, Mass Bio. It has this whole DEI group that's led by Edie Longfellow, and there's just a lot of resources in Massachusetts that you wouldn't find anywhere else, and they're all willing to help. I think it's just getting over the hump of asking for help, which is a hard thing to do in the first place.
So far, I'm not sure like if we've had like, because we're fundraising right now and I'm in a cohort with other people who through Petrie who are also fundraising, and I don't know if it's going differently for me than it is for them, but I do think that something Elizabeth said about like changing what you read is helpful, because, and I'm only still beginning to do this, but I realized that like I've never really seen other people pitch because I hadn't been in this ecosystem before. And so just being like a newcomer to the ecosystem, like I just don't know a lot of things that I think I would know if I'd like always been interested in this. And like things like financing, like nobody's ever talked to me about money in like my life, basically about like how you would do investments and things. And I noticed like my brother asks about those, but I don't ask. I just, cause like I never paid attention. So now I'm like having to take an interest in something that I hadn't been interested in before. And I don't like, I feel like kind of bad that I wasn't interested in it, but, and it's definitely like scarier for me to talk about money and say like, this is how much money I need you to give me. And this is for how much, but like I'm learning. And like, the more I see other people doing it, the easier it gets. And I feel like it's just like, kind of like I'm very naive when I started doing this, and I'm only getting the hang of it now. And like when there's a lot of times when we have to talk to like CROs and consultants and set budgets, and that's been something that's just been like a new experience for me. And it's like I had my colleague do it once, and he just like really did it really well, and then I kind of learned from him to do it. And so I think I just hadn't had as many opportunities to see like this world of like finance and fundraising before. And so that's, I don't know if that would have been different if I were a man or not, but it's been something that like I've had to learn extra. But I don't know if it's otherwise really affecting us, but I don't know. I hope we get through. I think it's the right time to be starting a company as a female in Massachusetts. Like there's a lot of interest in supporting people and a lot of great programs.
Yeah, I wonder like how much of like your lack of interest is just because you've been like conditioned to think like you shouldn't care about those things as well, you know. So there's all these probably external forces kind of playing into it. So it's a challenge to be an entrepreneur, and it's an exceedingly harder challenge to be a female entrepreneur, I think, period, end of sentence, right? Every single statistic out there shows that it's much more difficult for women to raise money than it is for men, right? So I mean, Jennifer said it at the beginning, I think like 85% of venture dollars are going to dudes, right? So like math doesn't lie. So, you know, I think women have to prove themselves more. You know, we have to walk a fine line of being ambitious and visionary, but realistic, where like boys sometimes get credit for just the vision and not having the work, you know, the data to support that. So, it's a challenge, but the good thing is, and what I think MassNextGen did for me was it kind of curated this cohort of like people who have done it before, right? And this is particularly referencing kind of the mentors that are a part of the program who have now become like dear friends of mine, you know. Shout out to like Jo Viney. She is like one of the most amazing women in biotech that bends over backwards to support other women. Now I'm going to blend in another, I'm on the board of West as Women in Entrepreneur Science. And interestingly, many of the women in the Next Gen mentorship program are also on that, because there's this cohort of women that have been through it, you know, and then they do everything they can to kind of support other women. So Mariana Nocht, Anne DeWitt, others as well, like just an amazing group. I put Jennifer Griffin and everybody at the MassNextGen in that really wants to help women like get over these unique challenges that we have, because they are there. And I think hopefully, you know, through programs like MassNextGen and others, we create a little bit more of normalization around female CEOs and female entrepreneurs. You know, I remember when I first started Olaris, like I was the token female biotech CEO. I have spoken on nearly every single panel that like, and like conference like in Massachusetts, because there's this need to put like a female on the stage so people feel good about it, right? It wasn't the same need to give me money. But like, I think now we've got just a lot more. So like people are seeing that there's more success stories, and then that in turn trickles down to lead to even more people kind of entering into this arena.
Wow. Thank you. Now, to leave the audience feeling even more inspired before I go into the Q&A is, what would be that one piece of advice that you would give, and your final piece of advice here to women in the audience who are thinking about or just interested in starting a company? Virginia, would you like to start?
Sure. I've been thinking about this one a lot, actually. I think it's the hardest question. One thing that like I've noticed is there's been a couple of times when I'll be doing something and I think like, oh, everybody else isn't going to be preparing that much. And then I'm like, no, I need to prepare a lot. And so I'll spend like 3 days working on one like hour-long talk. And I'm like, am I going overboard? Am I making too big of a deal out of it? But like, you're not. And everybody's working really hard for things that seem like big deals. And so like, there's been like 2 or 3 times when I've been like, I already did enough. It's not worth doing more. And I've really blown it. And like, I think that if you have a gut feeling that you need to work on something, or you have a gut feeling that you need to talk to somebody, like there's a lot of like trusting your gut and doing what you think is the right thing. And there's advice coming from everywhere. And if you just ask for enough advice, you'll get advice that goes along with every single emotion you have. And so you really have to like follow what you think is the right thing and work really hard. Sometimes when it seems like maybe you don't need to, I've always felt like more work is better, which is sad.
Thank you, Virginia. Liz?
Yeah, so I think, I don't know if I'll be as articulate as I hope I could be, but, for women in the audience that are thinking of starting a company, I would, let you know it's hard work, right? And you're going to have to work harder than you ever had. You're going to be probably treated unfairly. You're going to have to prove yourself. You're going to have to be the best in the room. And oftentimes, even when you are the best in the room, you won't get recognition for that. So all of that is ahead of you if you want to enter into this room. And even though that's unfair, I will say, if you believe in what you are doing and that you think it can make impact on the world, it's 100% worthwhile. And, so I would encourage women to sort of maybe get the headspace around that, very likely this is the world that you're going to enter. It's not going to be all sunshine and rainbows. But if you have the courage to kind of walk through that and the resolve, I think you can do great things. So I hope others continue on this path.
Thank you, Liz. Mimi.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Virginia and Liz said. I think it's ultimately about trusting yourself. I think women we have a lot of self-confidence issues when it comes to running a business. It's very intimidating. I think coming from academia especially, you have the skill set to learn what you need to do to succeed. And if you believe in your project enough, if you believe in your vision enough, you have to trust yourself to make that vision be realized. And I think the hardest thing for me especially was figuring out that asking for help is not a weakness. So yes, I trust myself to learn all these things. I know I'm a sponge and I can immediately apply all these things, but I can't possibly do it all alone. So being able to ask for help, not being worried that you look stupid or you need to prove yourself to these people that you're asking for help from, just realizing that there's so many people out there who want to help. And Liz, I think, was very realistic. There are a lot of people who will ignore you. There's a lot of people who will downplay your ideas and maybe choose to invalidate you, but there's a lot of people here who will also validate you. So I think trusting yourself and trusting the people around you and knowing that there is a strong network in Boston to help you do what you're dreaming about doing.
Thank you, Mimi. Thank you for all of your candid experience sharing, and thank you for your inspirational stories. Now I want to transition it back to Julie. Would you like to let us know the questions from the audience so the panelists could address the different questions from the audience?
Sure. For the audience's benefit, my name is Julie Raymond, and I'll be staying off camera today, but I'll be directing questions from the audience to the panel. And first, I'd like to start by thanking Lee and the panelists. That was a really great discussion. We are running a little bit low on time, so we only have time for a few audience questions, but we'll try to reach out after this event to answer any unanswered questions. And we also received a few questions regarding funding sources and networking that were I believe, already addressed by the panel. But if you have specific questions or additional questions, you're always welcome to reach out to OTD, the Office of Technology Development, after this event. So we'll jump right in. Could you share the top 2 or 3 qualities or skills that you think were critical for your success as an entrepreneur?
I think there's like so far the ability to like look something up and figure out how to do it and then do it is really important, because there's so many totally different things. And like I'll spend a day like getting somebody health insurance and then ordering molecules from like different vendors and then having to go do a pitch to get lab space. Like just everything's totally different and it all has to get done. And so like executing, like that's the CEO for a reason, because you figure out and you do it and again and again and again.
Yeah, I think multitasking, I will echo, is that, you know, and being able to bounce seamlessly from a science meeting to an investor meeting to like, I don't know, a meeting about immigration with lawyers or whatever it is, you know, of having to jump through all of that. I think that's really important. I think humility as well, realizing that you might not know everything, but, you know, being determined to go kind of figure things out. And then I think like the most area like entrepreneurs have to get comfortable with is making decisions with incomplete data, right? Like we are never going to have time to figure it all out, but like if you wait to do that, your company is going to stall. So, you know, you got to be able to kind of move in situations where you don't have the full background.
Yeah, and I'll add onto that that something that I really had to learn is that complete was better than perfect, and getting something done, not being stalled on, oh my gosh, I didn't have everything ready for this slide deck. My friend told me that the rule that he goes by is that everyone is probably about 80% on the same page as to what perfect looks like. So your perfect might not be what someone else's perfect looks like, but it being done is definitely better than it being not done. So being comfortable with that part of it, just because at a startup, everything's moving so quickly. And I think the other thing is passion. So I think something that all 3 of us have is passion for our vision, passion for our company. And if you're working on something that you're not passionate about, you're not going to be able to put all that work in to realize that vision. And also you're probably going to be really unhappy. So passion is something that everyone looks for in a CEO. It's what investors look for. It's what you yourself should be looking for, because you're probably going to have to sacrifice a lot for this to happen. So I would say passion or grit or some variation of that.
Thank you. Looking back at your journeys, is there anything that you wish you were better prepared for that maybe as a research scientist you might not have had the appreciation for?
I can start. Mine is accounting. So I didn't have a finance background. I took like maybe 1 class during my MPH, but accounting, especially for someone who is a government contractor, is huge. So I wish I knew more about the basics of accounting before I started a company.
I think that'd be mine too. So I don't know, I want to take too much airtime, but yeah, I think learning like budgeting and spreadsheets, like the financial sides of a business. So I think sometimes scientists think if we have a good idea, business automatically follows, but that is not the case, right? There's a lot more that has to come to it.
Yeah, and I would say for me, like, I wish I'd taken an interest more just in the business side of things. And like, I even watched movies about people who do businesses, like anything like would be better, because it was just a totally new culture for me to start talking to business people all the time. And like in science, like as a computational biologist, we're all about like, oh, we can talk to experimentalists and we can talk to people who are in the dry lab, but there's a lot of other people out there that like, there's a lot of vocabulary that I've needed to learn. And so like, just more about business.
And we only have time for one more question. It's along the same lines, but looking back, is there anything that now you would have done differently?
I mean, hindsight's always 2020. So maybe since I'm we're the oldest company here, you know, I can say like we've definitely made mistakes. But they've all turned into like great learnings. And I think like it's got Olaris to where it is. So truly, like, I know that might sound cliche or feel like a cop out, but I don't think so.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I feel like I learned a little bit from each mistake that we made. I guess my thing echoing back is I'm an introvert. You can be an introvert CEO. It's okay. I think I would have pushed myself to reach out more, to build more of a support network early on, because CEO is a bit isolating. So having more support in the beginning would have been really helpful, I think.
I kind of feel like we either win or we learn, and I feel like we're where we are, and I wouldn't go back and do things differently. Yeah, I guess I also feel like if you think like that, then you'll get kind of feeling bad about yourself and imposter syndrome. And I just like have to remind myself that like I'm doing what I should have done by the time that I've done it, and I can't expect to have done any more, and to just be happy with how things are going and what we can learn from different things that haven't gone well.
Those are really great answers. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank the audience today for being so engaged. And on behalf of the Diversity Working Group at OTD, I'd like to extend our gratitude to Jennifer and the team at Mass Life Science Center, to Lee, our moderator, and to the panelists for taking the time to speak with us today. I know I myself was very captivated by the lively discussion, and I'm sure our attendees have been inspired as well. So thank you very much for sharing your stories with us. This will conclude our event for today, and we hope that you'll all return for more equity and innovation events in the future. So have a great afternoon, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you.